There's a winter of growing discontent out in the nation's workplaces. Threats of industrial action are becoming louder and more numerous, and some big pay rises have been awarded as the ongoing labour shortage starts to bite. But is war looming, or is it just a lot of skirmishes? And is a wages blowout inevitable? Neil Woolrich reports.
It may look like any ordinary business, but JJ Richards waste collectors have found themselves at the centre of an industrial relations stink. Employers now fear the dispute could usher in a new era of union aggression and a mentality of strike first, negotiate later.
That's absolute rubbish, of course, and the reporting of this case has been really quite outrageous, I think, some of the statements that have taken place.
The outcome that we saw in the JJ Richards matter is just completely at odds with what we were told about how the framework was to operate. As I've said,
last week, the full bench of Fair Work Australia upheld an order that forces JJ Richards to start enterprise bargaining negotiations. The Transport Workers Union had written to JJ Richards on Christmas Eve asking for talks. The company declined 2 weeks later. JJ Richards believed in January the parties were only discussing whether to start negotiations.
What the decision says is it's not okay for an employer to refuse to bargain. If the employees come and want to enter a new enterprise bargain, they have the right to bargain in good faith, and the judgment effectively says the employer can't just say go away.
We're all for a framework that encourages, facilitates bargained outcomes, but we can't be subject to double jeopardy where at the same time we've got a situation where unions can simply walk away from that framework and move straight into industrial action.
David Gregory says unions have been emboldened by the new industrial relations landscape and have been pushing hard on pay, with the mining industry most affected.
We have seen some absolutely extraordinary wage outcomes come from some of the negotiations there, and inevitably it does mean that whilst those sorts of things are not being replicated elsewhere, there are parts of those outcomes that unions are looking to push in negotiations in different industry sectors on the eastern seaboard.
The average in the mining and indeed the oil and gas sector is way north of $120,000 per annum. In some sectors, like the offshore oil and gas industry, you have laundry hands, cooks, tradespeople, barge welders earning around $100,000 more than our Prime Minister.
What we've got is constrained wages growth. I think the average for the year so far has been about 3.8% wages growth. So it is constrained, it is reasonable, and there's no sign of a wages breakout. But yes, there are pressures in those industries where there's a high demand for skills.
Well, for the first time since the commencement of the global financial crisis, we're seeing the labour market move from an employer's market to an employee's market.
And David Wakely says wage pressures are emerging across most industries. Over the past year, 90% of big businesses have offered pay rises and 12.5% of workers have changed jobs.
That might not sound like much, but that's a 25% increase in the number of staff who are voluntarily putting themselves on the recruitment market and landing roles. So I think we can see for the next couple of years we're going to see a lot more staff turnover.
But it's not just pay the resources industry is worried about. This week, the Mines and Metals Association launched an IR counterattack, setting up a fighting fund to challenge Fair Work Australia decisions.
There's a whole raft of determinations that are being handed down, which were not the way we expected the legislation would work. They're not the way in which the government told us that they would work. And so some of those will be tested through the courts.
This year, action has been threatened by Patrick Stevedoring's dock workers, Qantas pilots and most recently BHP Billiton coal miners in Queensland. Despite those high-profile flare-ups, the number of days lost to industrial disputes has remained around current levels for the past 2 years.
In fact, if you look at those disputes, actually not much has happened in terms of industrial action that's taken place. You know, days lost, yes, there's been some high-profile statements about them, but actually, the numbers are quite clear. Industrial disputes are down.
We do have a large number of major enterprise bargaining rounds coming up over the next few months. Clearly there are high-profile ones in transportation, both on the wharves and in the airline industry, and they are going to get a lot of attention.
While pay, conditions and workplace unrest are getting plenty of media attention, productivity is not. Last week's national accounts revealed that GDP per hour worked fell 1.8% in the March quarter, although neither side of the IR debate is blaming the Fair Work Act for that. Employers, though, are worried that unions are celebrating workplace agreements which deliver pay rises, but nothing in the way of meaningful productivity targets.
We've now had a situation where we are not seeing productivity growth coming through changes to our labour market arrangements. We are not seeing delivery in terms of the productivity growth that we were told was going to come through a framework that was going to enhance workplace negotiations.
I would say, in response, aware of the changes that have happened on the employer side, I see a lot of employers in this country who are prepared to criticise government about lack of investment in training and development and so on, and not prepared to make a contribution themselves.
But given the already heated industrial relations environment, productivity might have to take a back seat for a while longer as unions and bosses continue to slug it out.